r/AskScienceFiction. Straight Half 1368 says, Harry Potter, what would happen if we just decided to nuke Scottish Highland entirely? Yes, I understand that Hogwarts is unplottable, has muggle repelling spells, and is invisible to radar and human eyes, making it impossible to locate. But what if, instead of trying to find it, we simply destroy the entire region? The entire Scotland if possible. Setting aside the environmental, political, and numerous other issues, what if we dropped approximately 100 sub-bombs, 100 Mount 21 before editing, on Scotland? Hogwarts is unplottable, not invincible. Even a few Death Eaters can disable the magical shields with low power spells. If the wizards can't use any teleportation spells, could they survive such an attack? Supergills says, Least genocidal Witchinter. Macinta Sheddy says, Ye canny put the nukes on a Highland man saying Harry where's your wizards? Vishensofta Futura says, Somewhere in the world at the bottom of the sea an officer on a submarine will unlock his safe and read the letter contained within. Consistent Blood 6467 says, Well, you have to take into account a few different things, one being the fact that the UK in general is not going to like someone aiming nukes at any other part of it. As such, the Muggle PM would be on the phone to whichever country has launched the nukes trying to get them to abort or self-destruct them, while countermeasures are activated to shoot the nukes down, if all that fails. Retaliation would come from the UK's Trident subs launching their payloads towards the aggressor who most likely will counter those and so on. In that case, hello WW3. Now, assuming these nukes are somehow able to get past Britain's radar and other countermeasures, the wizards seem bewilderingly uniformed in many areas of Muggle culture and society, so there's a chance they don't know anything about nukes. That said, they might be able to cast spells to redirect them, or even control them long enough to make them crash into the sea. I can just picture the Quidditch teams flying around trying to cast spells at nukes soaring towards a castle. That would probably create a few tidal waves that would do a fair bit of damage to the Scottish shoreline and all coastal villages, towns, and cities nearby. Possibly a few hundred, maybe thousands dead from that, and lots of washed up dead sea life. At that point, the Muggle PM gets a report about the nukes whose point of origin will now have been traced as Trident will probably be drummed into service again. Hello WW3. That said, assuming the wizards are so utterly out of touch with the Muggle world that they have no way to even spot the nukes coming, then I doubt they would have any magical defensive strong enough to block one nuke, let alone what might very well need to be a carpet bombing run in a bid to be just sure. That would result in everyone in Hogwarts, Hogsmeade and any hamlets inside that area getting wiped out in a series of explosions. That would make T2 Judgment Day blush, and the rest of Scotland gets coated with a nuclear winter. Also, the Muggle PM would get his report, the attack would be traced, something Trident, something. Dragon Whisper 56 says, I mean, if you sink that part of the island, that may destroy the school. Note however that only applies if they don't know it's coming. They can probably work up a spell to at least cushion the blast, and can most likely cure radiation poisoning given time. Archporn says, the Scottish Highland has an area of 30,660.2793 km². The area in the heavy blast damage radius is 5,237.50651 km². So, even if it was a regular castle, it would probably survive. Some of the students might get cancer, but even if they don't have a magic cure for cancer, besides the one Nicholas Flamel kept for himself and then destroyed, they could still cut out any tumors and heal the damage. Hogwarts is a magic castle. I don't know if the protections would help against radiation, but I'm sure they'd make it physically stronger, and the nuke would have to be much closer to knock it over. The radius for third degree burns is much larger. I would not want to be outside. But as long as a wizard can reach you and heal you before you die, you'll be okay. Students inside the school would be fine, with some burns, if they're near windows. I'm not sure if they'd be able to quickly find students outside school grounds. If they have the Marauders map, that should help find everyone quickly. Ultimately, a much better option is to have widespread education on nukes and antimatter, and wait for some muggle-born wizard try transfiguring or conjuring one while at school. r/AskScienceFiction. Solentredon90 says, time travel, are there any stories where time travel and interacting with history by itself have no physical consequences? I'm curious if there are any stories where the act of traveling back in time and interacting with history have no consequences by itself. Like there aren't time cops, you don't get erased from existence or wreck the universe. PM Mia Cat's Tits says, there's some movie where they go back in time and big game hunt dinosaurs. It doesn't affect time because the whole hunting grounds is about to get obliterated by some volcano shortly after until it goes wrong. Came out in the early zeros, I think. Mr. Brown says, Peabody and Shaman, I think that most children's time travel is consequence free. Hall Jordan 2424 says, in Stephen King's The 22nd of November 1963, it's no big deal when you go back in time, so long as you are a harmless tourist. The universe only fights you when you purposely try to change history. Balloonist says, off to be the wizard has probably the best answer in Sci-Fi about why messing with the past won't impact the future. Epcapris says, Doctor Who, mostly. They posit there are points that can't be changed regardless of your actions. JFK will always die in Texas on that day, and others where changes would be meaningless to the timeline. Your mom and dad met on a different day, you are still you. Earthwest 420 says, there's definitely at least a couple Star Trek episodes where there's a time travel element, but at the end it gets resolved, so that none of the events of that timeline ever happened. Gomanokauhei says, Mozart in Mirror Shades. They can drill for oil in the past because it creates a forking timeline, so it won't affect their future. Aussie Dragon 97 says, Prehistoric Park. The premise of the show is that humans go back in time to save extinct animals from extinction by bringing them to a wildlife park in the 21st century. The time travel aspect is very glossed over, but it's implied that a lot of the animals being rescued would have died anyway. The most obvious example is in the first episode, where a pair of T-Rex are rescued literally seconds before they are vaporized by an asteroid impact. The Minmus Derp says, time travel in the first two Terminator movies is a stable loop, if that's what you mean. Ivitha Floergeral says, while it might not be necessarily what you asked, time travel doesn't have any consequence in Dark 2017 because it's all a stable loop and there isn't any unaltered timeline which time travel disrupts. And, since it's all happening both infinitely and all at once, time travel doesn't have any consequence per se, rather it preserves what it already is. And Throwaway One says, I once read a time travel book and I need to find it. I think it was The Accidental Time Traveler. Someone basically says that turns out most people and things aren't all that important to history with a few exceptions. One Stelovan says, there's an Asimov story that deals with a temporal agency. There's a concept there where changes have small effects, but they can't change much when it comes to the big picture. You always end up in the same place when a few millennia pass. Niven once posited that time travel causes chaos, and nature tends to balance. If you throw a pebble into a pond, it'll create lots of ripples, but eventually it goes back to flat. So anytime a time machine is invented, it causes loads of chaos, which invariably leads to the time machine not being invented. r/AskScienceFiction. ThePixel Paint says, General Fantasy, why do the fair folk hate iron so much? Von Bumslang says, a story by an author I refuse to name, does an interesting twist on the cold iron trope. Cold iron is a mistranslation / misinterpretation of iron of the north, i.e. it's supposed to be iron that points north. Gladius Nocturno says, from what I understand, the cold iron trope comes from an old version of magic vs technology. The idea is that iron objects harm Fey because it's a man-made artifact. Iron is found in nature, but refined iron objects are a human creation. By this logic, paper should also hurt fairies, but it seems like this trope mainly focuses on metals. Although to be fair, there are plenty of folktales in which the thing that wards off from fiend spirits are human creations such as trinkets and emblems made of wood. So, I think it's fair to interpret this concept as humans having the natural ability to create objects that are anti-magic. You are not likely to find a naturally occurring iron horseshoe, but humans can make one, and this gives the iron an anti-magic effect that scares off fairies. Edit. The more I think about it, the more it makes me think that humans are kind of up in a conflict against fairies. They can use ancient magic that manipulates the element, the mind, and time itself, but if they are hurt by anything we create, you can actually kill a fairy with a fly swatter, and microplastics should have already driven all fairies extinct by this point. Avid Reader 10 says, according to Terry Pratchett, Fey races like elves and fairies have a natural directional sense based on magnetism. Iron interferes with this sense, so it's like putting them in a sensory deprivation tank. This is the inside of the mind of an elf. Here are the normal 5 senses, but they are all subordinate to the 6th sense. There is no formal word for it on the Discworld, because the force is so weak that it is only ever encountered by observant blacksmiths, who call it the love of iron. Navigators might have discovered it were it not that the disk's standing magical field is much more reliable. But bees sense it, because bees sense everything. Pigeons navigate by it. And everywhere in the multiverse elves use it to know exactly where they are. It must be hard for humans, forever floundering through inconvenient geography. Humans are always slightly lost. It's a basic characteristic. It explains a lot about them. Elves are never lost at all. It's a basic characteristic. It explains a lot about them. Elves have absolute position. The flow of the silvery force dimly outlines the landscape. Creatures generate small amounts of it themselves and become perceptible in the flux. Their muscles crackle with it, their minds buzz with it. For those who learn how, even thoughts can be read by the tiny local changes in the flow. For an elf, the world is something to reach out and take. Except for the terrible metal that drinks the force and deforms the flux universe like a heavy weight on a rubber sheet, and blinds them, and deafens them, and leaves them rudderless and more alone than most humans could ever be. From Lord Zan. Nananapandaman says, it varies from source to source, but in general fairies, and magical folk in general, hate iron because it has anti-magic properties. It's why like graveyards are surrounded by iron gates, to prevent ghost, magical beings from leaving. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.